gentlemen, welcome to Retro Warriors episode 400.
Woo! That's a big number, Justin.
As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by Resident Evil Bastard Chris Saturn. We've done this over 400 times.
That's true, because at least one episode we did multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, holy shit. It's I feel like we need like music. Pablo, can you edit in just like literally half a second of like party music?
Yeah.
And that's it.
Or just a clip of you saying yay.
Yeah, well, that'd be good too.
Yeah.
That'd be perfect. As far as housekeeping, things are still a little weird around here, so if tonally things are strange, that's what's going on. But yeah, we've made it.
We recorded our first episode back in July of 2015.
Holy crap. And this means we're only a couple years from episode 500.
Yeah.
And then
episode
it means
500 is just a few episodes before our 10-year anniversary.
And then we are just halfway to episode 1000.
And then death.
And then probably death, statistically speaking. Man. Thank you for coming on our 400 episode journey. I was talking to someone the other day that messaged me on Instagram, and they were very nice. Yeah. They were like, I just found your show. This is great. I love it. You guys are hilarious, et cetera, et cetera. Very nice things to say. And then they go, I'm listening to it in chronological order. And I was like, oh, well, I'll see you in never because we haven't stopped yet.
Yeah, right.
And they go, in the episode I'm on, Justin just became a dad. And I was like, my kid's going to be 8 this year. I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about how many things have happened in our lives in the last 7 years and change.
Oh yeah, it's bonkers. And it doesn't help that it also happens to be the few years of our lives that like I got married and had a kid and moved out to the middle of nowhere, and COVID happened to all of us. Right. And it's just been a wild ride. You bought a new hat. It's very, very nice looking hat. So there you go.
I actually did get a hat. Got a beanie to keep my bald head warm.
I assumed that's the hat you were talking about. I didn't realize you were making a joke. No, you did buy a hat.
No, this was months ago. But no, I got one that says "What a terrible night to have a curse" on it.
As far as my week, I think we want to talk about Like a Dragon Ishin.
Yes.
Which we have both been playing.
Oh, yeah.
And has just been a wonder.
It's been delightful.
A really, really fun game. Now, you're a good 25 hours ahead of me.
Yeah, I'm in chapter 5.
I'm in chapter 3.
Okay.
So unless...
I've spent most of that time on sub-stories and stuff.
Okay, right.
And also at least 10 hours on just leaving the console on and staring at the wall. But that's
that makes sense.
Unrelated.
Yeah. It's great. I just want to say that it's great. I was a little nervous about it.
Me too.
And initially I had some complaints because I play the games for the combat. I love the combat in these games. It's so much fun. I mean, obviously the goofy story and melodrama and everything else are fun side things, but the reason I'm showing up to play is because the actual moment-to-moment gameplay is really enjoyable to me. And I was a little upset at first because there seemed like there's a lot less objects around for you to pick up and whack people with. And it seems that the styles and stuff are kind of steering you away from that whole aspect of picking things up. Now, when I played earlier Yakuza games, one of my favorite things to do was only get in fights near bicycles.
Yes.
So I could murder people with bicycles.
Right.
But in this game, you are equipped with a sword and a gun.
True. There's no bicycles around.
And there's no bicycles. And so you've got these. And then the items you do pick up are always boring things. It's like wooden boxes and tables, and that's kind of it. Yeah. And
you can pick up poles, big-ass poles.
True. Yeah. So right off the bat, I was a little disappointed because I was like, there's less things to just wail on people with.
That's fair.
And then I started really getting into the different styles available. And they are so much fun. Oh, yeah. It's so much fun. Yeah. And it's hilarious, too, because the best one is you have this style where you use your gun in one hand and your sword in the other hand, and you just eviscerate dudes.
Oh, yeah. You just cut through them. It's great. You just dance around.
And every combat, for me anyway, ends in these Indiana Jones moments where I have like sword whirled my way across the battlefield. There's one guy left on the far side, and I just gun him down at a distance repeatedly.
I am mostly ending battles with heat moves for the most part.
Well, as I've leveled up, I'm getting there, because you don't start with a lot of heat moves. You start with really, I think, just one. I think for a while there, I just had the one heat action.
Yeah, well, one for each
stance. Yeah. But
I am up to level 36, I think.
Okay.
And then each of my individual jobs are all up to level 15.
Yeah.
So I have filled out a good chunk of the level up board, and I've also done almost all the sub stories now. I'm at like 80-something% of the sub stories. And I found one of the sub stories because I was originally using a guide from the old version of the game just to do all the sub stories, and I discovered that one of the sub stories that was in the original game is now locked behind one of the new sub stories, and that sub story can only be done after you've finished the game. And that frustrates me because I always like to do those before I finish the game. And that one is pretty much hard locked to after the game.
That's weird.
That is a
weird
little
thing to do.
Frustrating, but other than that, I'm really enjoying it.
My favorite is, for people that don't know, this is it's a Yakuza game, and it is set in feudal Japan,
right?
Basically.
Which I was a little worried about, because normally I'm not a huge fan of like period piece games.
Yeah, and they use all the characters from all the various Yakuza games.
Right.
They give them new names, and they just pretend that they're new people, even though they kind of really sort of personality-wise act the same-ish.
Right. And the people whose names they get in this are all actual people from Japanese history.
Yeah, which I do kind of wish they kept the regular names, just because the names are very complicated and long, and there's a lot of them, and they throw a lot of them at you at once.
Well, they're talking about real people, though, so I can get why they're using these different names.
No, I get why they're doing it, but it's just hard for my dumb American brain because they're hard names.
I already know Kiryu and Majima and Sejima and all that.
Yes. And so it's been a lot of fun seeing them all get to interact with each other at the same time and do weird different stuff together. It's just really fun. It's a very joyful experience, as serious and melodramatic as it is.
Now, did you get to the Another Life section yet?
I have unlocked it.
Okay.
But I have not gone to do it, because I know once I do, I'm going to be there for a long time.
Yeah. So
I'm really enjoying just grinding levels right now.
That's fair. I told myself I wasn't gonna do that much, just because I don't normally care for those chore style games.
Yeah.
And instead, I spent like 10 hours straight just growing vegetables.
You kept asking. You asked me a bunch of times. You're like, "Have you done another?" And I'm like, "Not yet. No, because I know it's going to consume me."
Yeah, just because there's not a lot to it either. There's growing vegetables. There's or soil foods,
and I know I can get animals because I've been going to shrines and unlocking better animal beds, so that when I do have animals, they have nice beds.
Well, the animals you get through sub stories. You have to play the sub stories to get those animals.
I've started a dog sub story,
and then you will get that dog eventually.
I see. Excellent.
And then so you can get 3 dogs and 3 cats and chickens.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you cook and then you sell things. That's the entire mini game, but it feels like a lot, even though it's not that much.
Right.
Also, I've gotten enough virtue to unlock everything now.
Oh, there you go.
Which is a lot. That's like 300,000, I think it said. So
yeah, that's a shitload.
Yeah.
But all this to say that Ishin is really good. Man, it's real fun. I will say, if you've been interested in the Yakuza games, and you've been kind of not doing it because you're like, hey, do I start with 0? Do I start with 1? Do I want to play all of them? Not all of them have more modern remakes. The later ones will feel dated. Like a Dragon, Yakuza 7 is a totally different genre. Where do I go? I would say this would be a real good one to start with. True, yeah. Because even though the characters are the same and they have kind of the same personalities, they're not actually the same characters. They're these characters in history, So I think at the very least it could set a baseline for characters, and you might enjoy seeing them in their native environments, going to other games. I think it's a good side story to say, hey, if you just sort of want to dip your toe in and play one of these.
Yeah, and see what the gameplay loop is like.
Yeah, this would be a good one. And then
It
after
also
this, straight
is
to the Kiwamis and Yakuza 0.
Yeah, and it's also a good introduction to the series' sense of humor because
absolutely.
it has a great sense of. I just played a sub story earlier today where a guy got upset because I implied that he had an unfuckable soul.
Saturn, I've told you not to tell people that their souls are unfuckable.
Well, maybe he should have a more fuckable soul, is all I'm saying.
So yeah, I think this is a game that you can very much enjoy, even if you're not invested in the Yakuza series, because to you they'll just all be characters, and then you'll see them later and get the same enjoyment that we're getting the inverse enjoyment of seeing those characters we saw before in this new environment.
And you'll also be confused by their names.
There you go, and it's just been an awful fun time.
Absolutely.
I have been fussing with RetroArch. I've been having some issues with it on my deck, which was uncharacteristic of my deck. And it took me going to RetroArch specific Discords and chatting with people and troubleshooting to realize what it was. I have installed some plugins to record footage on my deck because in some bizarre oversight, there is no way to record footage on the deck.
Weird.
And what I figured out is happening is every now and then, the video recording software I'm using will crash some portion of my video drivers to the point that RetroArch can no longer access my video card.
Weird.
And it took a night of digging through logs and chatting about Linux and just generally having a really good time doing it to figure that out. But all of this culminated in me thinking there were issues with the PS1 emulator I was using and switching to DuckStation, which is a standalone emulator, which I normally avoid because I want everything in RetroArch because it's easier. But I have been really enjoying DuckStation. It is an extremely robust emulator. It has a nice controller-friendly front end when you're in a game. For some reason, the actual regular front end when you're booting a game just looks like Dolphin. But then when you're in a game, you can hit your hotkey and it opens up a nice-looking menu with all your options and stuff.
Nice.
And apparently, the Swan Station core, which is in RetroArch, is made by a person that had a falling out with the person that made DuckStation, which is why they're similarly named.
Makes sense.
And performs similarly. But DuckStation is very much regarded as the premier PS1 emulator.
Yeah, I've heard that as
well. So on the one hand, I'm annoyed that a premier emulator is not RetroArch compatible. But also, I've kind of gotten used to it, and nice. It's a real nice PS1 to the point that I've been playing some PS1, which is weird for me because I don't traditionally love the PS1.
I played so much PS1 back in the day.
I'm one of those wrongies.
You are.
You know?
That's true. We discussed that last episode too.
I also got a hankering for a Western style RPG, installed Divinity Original Sin 2, and have just been puttering around in that. I'm like 40 hours into my game. I have no idea what's happening in the story. I don't care to know because I mostly just walk around killing people and making rash decisions. I did have a moment where like I started playing and I was like, oh man, is it going to come back to bite me that I don't remember what was happening in the story? And I do a couple quests and then literally enter into a situation where two extremely powerful people are about to kill one another and I have to decide who I'm backing based on their previous actions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, fuck. I don't know. Which one's more evil? I have no idea. So yeah, I did just pick randomly. I was like, that guy looks familiar, so he must have been an asshole before for me to remember him. So let's kill that one. And it has, of course, long-reaching ramifications throughout the rest of my gameplay. And then I killed all the elves.
Nice.
And I got an achievement called Genocide, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe that's real bad. I don't want to do a genocide. So then I went back and did the opposite.
Well, and you should have known it would have been a genocide when you killed them all.
Well, I didn't know it was going to kill them all. I just killed one thing, and it happened to trickle down to all the elves. It wasn't clear to me. It wasn't clear that I was killing all the elves. To be clear, I had no idea. I thought I was killing just one thing. And then I did that, and then it was like, no, all the elves. And I'm like, well, you didn't say that. Nobody said that to me.
You didn't realize they were all drinking from that well you were poisoning.
I had no idea. Anyway, that's been my week. Other than Like a Dragon, Ishin, what have you been playing?
a lot of Like a Dragonation.
Yes, I've noticed.
Yeah, well, I've had this week off work, so
Yeah.
And then also Wonder Boy Anniversary Collection came in. My
How
copy of
is
the
that?
physical copy. It is a good collection of games. First of all, because it has every version aside from the PC Engine version of all 6 games in the Wonder Boy series.
Okay.
Which that's exciting. The domestic version that you can buy off of Amazon is like $10 cheaper than what I got, but it doesn't have several of those games, and it only has one version of each game that it does have. Whereas this one has arcade and Master System and Game Gear and Genesis when applicable. So you get a bunch of different versions of a bunch of different games, which I always love that. I love being able to compare the different iterations of a game,
Right?
The different console releases. That's always fun to me. The emulation is super solid, which it should be for games of this era. I would be disappointed if it wasn't. The menu interface is it feels a little dated. Like the font that it uses feels like somebody just accidentally got the default PlayStation font.
So maybe kind of like the UI on like the Konami collections that came out a few years ago.
A little less than that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. However, it does have some neat things included. You've got your rewind and your fast forward, which is good. It's got save states, which is also good. And it also includes maps that you can't see while you're playing the game. You have to exit out to the menu to look at them. And by default, they're all zoomed out really far, so everything is super tiny on them, but you can zoom in and move them around and everything. So you can see full maps for all the games, which is really nice. I also noticed that it allows you to scale the game. It does have some good CRT filters and shaders and stuff, and you can scale how big you want the game to be. In the Game Gear games, you can do it 1x, and they look like a postage stamp in the middle of the screen.
A little 3-inch screen in the middle of your 65-inch 4K.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Why would they even? Who is that for?
I'm guessing it's supposed to be for Switch users because the game is also released on Switch.
Okay, and on Switch in handheld mode.
Yes,
it would still be really fucking small.
Be small, but it'd probably be about the size of an actual Game Gear screen. Well, no, it'd be smaller than that because the resolution of the Switch is higher.
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, so it's ridiculous is what it is. But you can also go up to, full screen or whatever. It's very granular as far as how far it lets you zoom as well, so which is nice. But yeah, it seems to play pretty well. My biggest complaint is just how old looking the fonts and the menus are. But the actual gameplay itself is solid. It does have trophies for some of the games on PlayStation, but not all of them. Like Dragon's Trap has no trophies whatsoever, which is weird. Because that's my favorite game in the collection. But that trophies aren't the reason you buy it. It'd just be a nice bonus. But it is it does feel to be a competent and well put together collection. But it really just makes me want to replay the Dragon's Trap remake because I love that.
So good. So good.
It's so good.
I wish we could go to younger Saturn and be like, hey, in the future, there's a shitload of Wonder Boy stuff coming out. Like a lot for what the franchise is.
Yeah, I mean, on my shelf with my PS4 games, right next to each other, I have the Anniversary Collection, which has all the games. I have the Dragon's Trap remake, and I have the Monster World 4 remake, all right next to each other in discs that I can put in a PlayStation and play. That just when we started this show 7 years ago, I never would have believed that would have happened.
Right, for sure.
So I'm glad to see the series get it, and plus the Monster Boy, the spiritual successor, which is excellent. So good on Wonder Boy for coming back.
Let's do the news. First up, Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami is leaving Bethesda, which I didn't even realize he was at, following the successful launch of Hi-Fi Rush, which came out and seemed to be doing well.
Oh yeah, he was the director on The Evil Within, which was also Bethesda, and also Ghostwire Tokyo was his team. So
that was one that came out, and then I feel like everyone just collectively forgot about immediately.
Well, it's because it was PS5 exclusive, and it was hard to get a PS5.
Maybe that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think its exclusivity ends soon, so it's probably coming to other platforms within the next month or so.
Yeah. PS4 and PS5 release of Legend of Dragoon, which, need I remind you, is a PlayStation 1 game, has launched with several bugs that caused soft locks, which have since been patched. How do they still not know how to release PS1 games.
Did you see their recommendations?
No, what did they say?
They said hold the rewind key until you get back before the soft lock. And then try to save your game, and then close it, and then reload it, and try again.
And then wait for us to patch it.
Yep.
Because apparently we still don't know what the fuck we're doing.
It's just so weird because their PS1 emulation on PS3 and PSP and PS Vita was fine.
It's totally fine.
Worked great. And you could even like dump in other ISOs into that emulator and they worked fine.
Also worked great. I played a ton of PS1 games that way.
Yeah, I ripped my Lunar discs and copied them in my PSP that way, and it worked great. Yeah. And now on PS4 and PS5, they have forgotten how to do that. And then the PS Classic, they just used an off-the-shelf emulator with some various region ROMs.
You know, I know we talk about how excited we are to see official emulation because, you know, if I can pay you for a game, I'd like to pay you for a game.
Right.
I'm not against paying you for a game, but your options have to be better than the free options.
Right. And I mean, I appreciate that it is making the game available to a new audience who otherwise wouldn't know about it if it weren't available officially.
Well, I don't know that you appreciate that Legend of Dragoon is being made available, but in a general sense,
yes.
I think you appreciate it.
I know a lot of people love the game. I personally do not.
I loved the game when it came out. Now, it was like right after playing the GBA Final Fantasies. I had just played Dawn of Souls, and I was like, oh my God, these JRPG things are pretty great.
Yeah.
And I had then played Final Fantasy IX, and then went to Legend of Dragoon because I had a PS1, and Legend of Dragoon was way cheaper than any other Final Fantasy game on the PS1 for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so I played that one to death, and I've not played it since I was a kid. And so I worry that I'm going to hate it if I go back to it.
My only serious complaint with Legend of Dragoon, because it's a competent game, it's fine, is that every single battle requires full attention. So you can't just mindlessly grind, and that's a problem for me. I need that in my JRPGs.
Yeah. Hironobu Sakaguchi said he'd like to port Fantasian to PC, but then went on to imply that the Apple Arcade exclusivity won't be expiring anytime soon.
Which is unfortunate.
Which is unfortunate, and I don't think shocking to anyone that Apple would have extremely long exclusivity windows.
Yeah, he had also mentioned he wants to make a sequel, and the way that he phrased it, either the translation was wonky, or he phrased it in such a way of, I would like to make a sequel, but I cannot under my current contract.
Right.
So it's a little unfortunate that he seems a little trapped there.
Yeah, that's not good. And Fernax is getting a multiplayer co-op update.
I'm so stoked.
I don't even know how to feel about this. This is exciting and weird.
Yeah, everything that Infernax did was fun and weird.
Yeah.
So I am excited to see what this is.
Well, we'll have to play it. Is it online?
I assume so.
Okay. Well, that's even better.
Right?
I wouldn't assume so. Indie games and online, they sometimes they don't.
That's fair.
You know, but we'll see.
We'll make a way for it to work.
Naoki Yoshida, aka Yoshi P, says he doesn't like the term JRPG and once considered the term discriminatory.
I can kind of see where he's coming from. There was that period during the Xbox 360 and PS3 era where the media as a whole treated any JRPG or games that still use JRPG-like elements instead of Western RPG elements as if they were products of the past and not as good as modern games.
Yeah.
And I actually found an article somebody had shared the other day. It was I think it was IGN article from 2009 or 2010 that was like, Japanese RPGs are stuck in the past. Here's 10 tips they need to follow in order to catch up to the times. And one of them was like always online functionality. And no more turn-based combat. You know, all the shit that... one of them was get away from all that 2D sprite art. Make sure everything looks realistic. And basically they just wanted them to make Mass Effect is what they were getting at.
Yeah. I feel like any designer... I shouldn't say any. I feel like it's normal for designers to feel... like they don't want to be boxed in.
Right.
And I can see how it would be annoying that anytime you make a game that isn't an action game, people are like, oh, well, it's a JRPG. When you're like, no, well, I mean, it's so much more than that.
Right.
please stop putting me in this box.
Right.
So I get the argument.
Right.
And
plus
I think
we just had a whole episode about genres and how they don't mean anything anyway.
Yes, I think the term is much more complimentary these days. But you're right. There was an era in the kind of the Xbox 360 era where it wasn't very complimentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get what he's trying to say. I think,
and there's a reason for it, because a lot of the games coming out in that era that tried to still be JRPGs were kind of shit.
Yeah, they were stuck in the past, but the problem wasn't that they were turn-based or maybe that they had pixel art. The problem's that some of them were badly designed.
Yeah, and some of them were just 20 hours of cutscenes wrapped around some mediocre gameplay.
I'm not going to let you disparage the .hack games like
no, I'm
that,
saying
Saturn.
the PS3 era games.
Okay, I'm not going to let you disparage one of those.
Exactly.
Metroid Fusion is releasing on Nintendo Switch Online Plus on March 9th. I presume they listened to our Metroid Fusion episode, and when you know what, those Retro Warriors guys have something, they got a point. Let's release Fusion. So for once, we get to be timely.
Yeah, somebody in our Discord pointed out that the original version of Fusion came out day and date with Prime, and so it's weird that they released Prime Remastered before putting Fusion on there. And I imagine that there is zero chance that the two actually talk to each other.
Oh, none whatsoever. And I think that's why they stagger them, because if they did them at the same time, everyone would be like, well, they're going to talk to each other like they used to.
Right.
And they're going to be like, no, because we just used an emulator we found on the internet, so we can't, Although I will say this, someone brought this up in the Discord, and we were being kind of critical of Nintendo and how they are slow-rolling emulation we've all had since 1998.
Yeah.
And they're saying, to their credit, apparently the Game Boy emulator, specifically the Game Boy emulator on Nintendo Switch Online, is very friendly to speed running.
Nice.
And accuracy. And I will say that accurate emulators, surprisingly, are not super common.
True.
And so it's nice to see that aspect of things. And also the idea that one could play an officially released Game Boy game in a speedrunning scenario without having to necessarily use, emulators that are questionably legal.
And Nintendo themselves have not the best track record with that, since the Super Game Boy was famously not the same clock speed as the original Game Boy, so games ran at a different speed on it.
So it's I will say that as far as I don't know that any of this was intentional on Nintendo's part, but I think they inadvertently did give back to the community in that small way. Yeah, now they just need to release more fucking games on it, because what do we got?
I don't know about that.
Got like 6 of them?
Yeah, that's a lot. That's enough.
They could have come out of the gate with 50 games.
Yeah, they could have. But
they could have come out of the gate with like all of the games. They could have been like all of them. All the Game Boy games we have the rights to release. Here you go. Every one of them. But they did not.
Instead, soon we'll get Pokemon Puzzle Challenge.
Oh man, I actually like Pokemon Puzzle Challenge. Yeah. And finally, Nintendo confirms that Metroid Prime Remastered will receive additional physical prints. If you're looking for a physical copy, it will be out there. Just breathe with me, just deep breath.
Now we say this, by the time this episode runs, maybe they'll have already issued out another print and then released another statement saying, no, that was it. That's all of them.
Yeah.
You never can tell with Nintendo. So
some people have been struggling to find the physical. I know Pablo was looking for one. He finally found one, but he had been looking real hard for
some
one.
Some pawn shop.
It's nice to see them confirm, hey, this will be available, which is not something they always do for whatever reason.
But it is a little depressing that we need them to confirm that, because we just don't know with them anymore.
Yes. The trust is gone.
Yeah.
Anyway, that brings us to our topic at hand. This week, for episode 400, we're talking Metal Gear Solid.
I've heard of that.
Also known as Metal Gear 3, which is different than Metal Gear Solid 3.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
The synopsis just says a Hideo Kojima production.
I also put it in big letters and spaced it out all fancy.
This was developed by KCEJ and published by Konami. It's Konami all the way down.
Yes.
Released on the PlayStation in Japan September 3rd of 1998, in North America October 21st, 1998, and in European and Australian territories February 26th, 1999. Japan got Metal Gear Solid Integral in 1999, which was a follow-up release. North America got VR Missions in 1999.
Yeah.
And Europe and Australia got Metal Gear Solid Special Missions in 1999.
Yeah.
And then there was a PC port in North America and Europe in the year 2000.
In the year 2000.
So it has been around.
Yes, and the PC release included the VR missions, just like Integral did. So
yeah, and I want you to know, Saturn, on the Wikipedia article for Metal Gear Solid, it says that it is regarded as one of the greatest and most important video games of all time
by Hideo Kojima.
By filibustercartoons.com, which doesn't exist anymore, and gametrailers.com.
Which do they still exist anymore?
They apparently do. At least to their YouTube video.
Wow.
So
good for them.
Just throwing it out there that dubious sources have claimed this. So this is a honestly, high bar.
Honestly, a lot of publications claimed that when it released as well. That was it was a massive
something about
thing.
The mid-90s seemed to be the era of saying this is the greatest of all time. Ocarina of Time, Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII. There was a run on claiming greatest, most influential game of all time for a few years there.
Yeah, I would say that the late 90s is a very influential period when it comes to game design. And we saw a lot of big hits in this era that influenced a lot of later games.
For sure.
I think that a lot of them have aged more than people realize because they either look at them through rose-tinted glasses or they look at them through nostalgia goggles. But that's not to diminish these games. Just to say that maybe they're not all the best game of all time. Maybe
there were good things, possibly better things before or since.
Now, Resident Evil 2 was the best game.
What year was that? Was that in the range we were just discussing? What was it? The 96 to 98 range.
Yeah, I believe that was 98.
Specific. Yeah, what is it with those 3 years?
I don't know.
Very strange.
I'm getting, for years I thought it was just that was when certain people were at that perfect age. And so for that group of people, that's where the nostalgia was. But it's carried forward. I keep expecting that to tip over and people to be like, no, Wind Waker is the best game of all time. And no, Final Fantasy 12 is the best game. But it's never happened. It's never progressed past that hump. And I
suspect, and this is, we're off on a full wild goose chase. We'll get to Metal Gear Solid, we promise. But I suspect that some of it may have to do with the fact that video games journalism was really codifying in that 96 to 98 range.
True.
Like, it existed before, certainly. Absolutely it did. But it was really becoming a thing and a career path, and it was really blowing up. Also, the previous two times video games came around in the, 8-bit eras and in the, the golden age, the Atari and ColecoVision eras, it wasn't as big. When the NES came out, not as many people knew about gaming, and it took a little bit of time for it to catch on. Now it caught on quick. But then when we hit the generation of consoles where we're hitting the 96 to 98 range, everyone is watching it. People are making careers just out of covering it, and everyone's looking at every little thing coming out. It's all being looked at under a microscope now.
And also this is where narrative gaming really took off.
Yes.
Despite the fact that it existed before that.
We all had Ninja Gaiden. There were cutscenes.
and nobody seemed to realize there was narrative before this. Nobody read anything in Ninja Gaiden, apparently. Everybody skipped the cutscenes or something. Nobody played a Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest before Final Fantasy VII. But that was when people started to notice the narrative, and those games that are often regarded as some of the best, aside from maybe Mario 64, are all very narrative heavy games. Ocarina of Time, Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil 2, all have a not only a narrative, but one that pretended at least to be more mature than what we were used to from prior console generations.
True, very true. I would say, I don't know. Mario 64 has a moderate amount of narrative for a Mario game,
I guess.
So deflated, I guess. As far as first encounters for Metal Gear Solid, I really was not aware of Metal Gear Solid until the sequel came out. That's so because it came out when I was 10, which is 1998.
Right.
And you may also know that Pokemon came out in 1998.
True.
So I didn't give a fuck because Pokemon and Beanie Babies were out and Backstreet Boys were a thing. I don't give a shit about Metal Gear Solid. Okay?
All right.
Saturn, Backstreet's back. Okay? So I was not in the headspace. I was not in the culture space for Metal Gear Solid, and I had no. I mean, I think I'd seen it around. The cover on the game is really boring.
It's true.
So it doesn't look super enticing.
No.
And so I just kind of missed it until the sequel, Metal Gear Solid 2, came out, and I was of the age for it. You know, what was Metal Gear Solid 2? Was it 2001?
2001, yeah.
2001. So I was a little bit older.
Yeah.
You know, I was a teenager. I was
3
becoming
years.
a teenager. You know, 10 to 13 is a big gap for
Fair.
a young man.
Yeah.
And so I was in the headspace for that, and it was exciting for me. But the first Metal Gear, I never went back to until I was a full-grown adult. I was not really super aware of it when it came out. It just, you know, I lost all of the people losing their minds over it.
Oh, yeah. I did not. I was in the middle of it because I was 16, 17, somewhere in there the first
perfect
time I
age
played
for it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And not only was it a big action stealth espionage game, but it was one with a supposedly very mature, very adult storyline. And so, I don't know who told me that, but all of my friends insisted that this was this was the James Bond of video games.
When you were 16, this is some deep shit.
Right.
When you're an adult, you're like, what the fuck's happening?
Yeah. So I didn't get it initially. I waited until after it had started to drop in price a bit, and picked up a copy and I did enjoy it. I played the hell out of it when I first got it. I thought that it was incredibly impressive, and then my sister and her husband came over, and her husband, he had to have been 35, 36 at the time, he lost his fucking mind over it. Like every time they came to our house, he was like, "Can I play that PlayStation game you've got again?" And he would just sit there and ignore my sister, ignore my family, and play Metal Gear for like 3 hours every time they came over.
Yeah. Let's talk development.
Yes, sir.
Now, this was originally intended to be a 3DO game.
Correct. Yeah, because he had already released Police Knots on 3DO.
Yes. Yep. And it was 1994.
Mm-hmm.
But the 3DO had already kind of started to decline after Police Knots released on it. I know. So Kojima shifted production to the PlayStation 1 and moved ahead with things.
Right.
And the plot for the game was originally going to be the plot for Metal Gear 2, which was originally on MSX.
Right.
Obviously, we're not talking about the Metal Gear 2 on NES because it's a different game. He didn't have anything to do with.
Game. Yeah.
But he changed it after deciding that the plot was too unrealistic and used a different plot for Metal Gear 2.
And that's the first time that Kojima has ever thought that something was too unrealistic.
And he stated, I found this interview where he says that after the end of the Cold War, he thought that suddenly the plot was totally believable and decided to use it in Metal Gear 3.
Well, yeah.
So the plot had been sitting around for years at this point.
Yeah, for almost a decade.
And then he decided to dub Metal Gear 3 Metal Gear Solid to remove any confusion about it being the third game in a series with a weird and largely unknown past.
Correct, yeah.
And this was his concern. He didn't want people to be like, well, I didn't play the first two, and then the first one's an NES game, the second one's an NES game, but that's not actually Metal Gear 2. I get it.
Yeah.
But he kind of implies that he's like, well, it's sort of a reboot. It's fucking not. It's an immediate and direct continuation of the previous two games.
But it also reuses a lot of elements from the first two games as well.
In a Famitsu interview, Kojima claimed that, quote, it's a new type of Metal Gear, end quote, when asked if it's the conclusion to the previous games. So he denied it.
Maybe he meant the actual tank itself was a new model. Metal Gear.
Maybe. Knowing him, I could see that. Development kicked off in 1995, and Kojima visited with the Huntington Beach, California SWAT team to learn about the tactics and gear they used for infiltration. When you want to talk about, we talked about over budget on Metal Gear games last episode. Yeah. Maybe Kojima hanging out with SWAT teams is Not necessary.
I saw a different interview with somebody who was there with them that was like an interpreter for Konami America and was like guiding them with this SWAT team. And like as he's talking to the interviewer about it, like the interviewer stops for a second and he says, "Yeah, it's exactly as ridiculous as you're thinking right now." And I appreciate that they understood the humor of the situation.
What gets me is Kojima really, and we're going to talk about it in a second, but he really wanted this game to be real.
Yeah.
And when you hear that and you think, oh, he went and trained with a SWAT team, here's the thing, though. I don't know that anyone on the SWAT team runs directly up behind people in a sneaking suit and chokes them to death. I don't think that's a SWAT team infiltration tactic.
Well, it depends on what city they're in and how many marijuanas they think the enemy has.
I'm just saying, I don't think they use FAMAS rifles. I don't think that's, or Nikita missiles. I don't think they use
Nikita missiles. They're just running around with giant Gatling guns and sniper rifles. Totally
I don't know
normal.
that they stand around with single action revolvers talking about how the greatest guns ever made. I just don't know what he gained from
a room full of tripwires
with the SWAT. And then the game is not about a SWAT team; it's about military.
Right.
I don't know what he was looking to gain here.
He was looking for a trip to Huntington Beach, California. Is what he was looking for.
During development, this was interesting. The team would occasionally map levels with Lego to help them design areas.
Honestly, that's pretty smart in the early 3D era.
Totally. In an interview with PSM, Kojima stated that, quote, "If the player isn't tricked into believing the world is real, then there's no point in making the game.
Uh-huh.
If you can captivate the player without having to trick them, then the game is worthwhile. That is the most tiring task," end quote. Now, the implication in the interview is that he was saying Metal Gear is so real that you would be tricked into believing the world is real.
But then he immediately goes on to say that if you can captivate them without tricking them, that's fine too.
But I think his implication is that he thinks he's tricked us and that we think Metal Gear is real.
Well, in fairness, he had his head way up his ass at the time. And in the 30 years since.
I do want to mention Yoji Shinkawa, the character designer on staff, who's responsible for the fantastic art that the series used from MGS onward.
Yes.
And I believe Shinkawa also had some hand in just kind of general character direction, visually anyway. I don't know about, development or anything like that. But Shinkawa's art is fantastic. Legendary in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and I think really elevates a lot of it.
Yeah.
So I did want to mention him.
Yeah, there was also of all things, a spinoff of the Front Mission series that Square Enix put out in 2019 that was meant to be a stealth action Front Mission spinoff. That also has his art. They paid him to come in and do the art for this really shitty Metal Gear knockoff.
How weird.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Yeah, no one remembers that game. It came out like a fart in the night and just immediately disappeared. No one remembers it.
Let's talk story.
Uh-huh.
And I want to say that if you've never played a Metal Gear Solid game, strap the fuck in. Because Tom Clancy would shit his pants at most of these stories. I do want to list out our protagonists.
Okay.
We have Solid Snake.
Yeah, David Hayter.
Who played by David Hayter, who you may know.
I love Kojima games that whenever it introduces a character, it has their voice actor in parenthesis right after their name. That's great.
And hopefully you remember some of them, because it was a great oversight of mine that I didn't put the voice actor names after I put in.
That's the only one I know off the top of my head.
Oh, dang.
Solid Snake and Liquid Snake are the only people I remember.
Now I feel bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We didn't give the voice actors as much screen time as the actual game did. I do that, but that is a big thing, especially in this era, to be really crediting anyone,
right?
Specifically game designers, voice actors.
Yes.
Kojima, for all of his weirdness, has always seemed really into like, hey, we made this game. These are the people that made it.
And also props to Konami, who we shit on quite a bit in the last episode. In this era, especially, Konami was really big on crediting their actual staff. And if you look at the back of a lot of their PS1 and PS2 game cases, it actually lists who the directors are, often the artists and composers, and sometimes the producers as well. So you end up with a list of a lot of the most prominent people who worked on the game right there on the case, even in English regions. So that's something that most game companies have never done, much less this early.
Yeah. Solid Snake, voiced by David Hayter. We have Colonel Roy Campbell. I pulled up the list.
Oh, good.
Who is voiced by Paul Eiding?
Paul Eiding, yes.
Paul Eiding, thank you. We have Naomi Hunter, who is voiced by Jennifer Hale.
Mm-hmm.
We have Nastasha Romanenko, who is voiced by Renee Raudman. We have Master Miller and Otacon. No, never mind. I thought he did two voices. Who does he do? He does Liquid Snake. Cam Clark is Miller and Liquid Snake.
Yes,
which makes sense in the
Cam Clark, who voiced Leonardo in the old Ninja Turtles cartoon.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Yes,
I did not realize that.
Yes.
We have Mei Ling, who is voiced by Kim Mai Guest. We have Otacon, who is voiced by Christopher Randolph, and we have Meryl Silverberg, who is voiced by Debbie Mae West. Now, it does say here, and I don't remember in the game, I don't think they're credited by their actual names.
Not all of them, no. Some of them are credited by pseudonyms or screen names, just because that's kind of how it was at the time, where you didn't always put your real name on voice work, especially for video games, because it was kind of seen as lesser work.
Right.
I know that Cam Clark's screen name that he used to go by at the time was Jimmy Flinders, which I just thought was the dumbest name.
He's credited as James Flinders.
Okay, yeah.
So these are our protagonists. A group of terrorists led by Foxhound operatives have taken over Shadow Moses, which is a government test facility on an island in Alaska, which happens to be where Solid Snake has been living since the events of Metal Gear 2.
He's just been hanging out in Alaska.
And they have seized the nuclear weapons there. They are led by Solid Snake's genetic twin, Liquid Snake, who suspiciously is no more liquid than Solid Snake. So I don't really understand how any of this is supposed to be working here.
Yeah.
He seems
just
equally
code names.
as solid.
They're not their real names.
I don't know. They're not snakes either, Saturn. So
they're just code names.
Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I do want to mention real quick while we're still talking about the voice actors.
Yes.
The same voice actors all came back for the GameCube remake.
Mm-hmm.
And they all went under their real names then.
Yeah.
And they all used their something closer to their normal voices instead of the over-the-top voices.
There's some very stereotypical voice work here.
Yeah, especially Mei Ling.
Yeah, I did want to mention Jennifer Hale. I was wondering why she sounded so familiar. She's Commander Shepard.
Yeah,
in
she
Mass
does
Effect.
a lot of stuff too. She does a ton of things.
Where was I? They've seized the nuclear weapons there.
Yes.
They're led by Liquid Snake. Snake enters the compound seeking to disarm the nukes and track down some hostages for some information.
Mm-hmm.
On the way, he finds DARPA Chief Donald Anderson. He finds Roy Campbell's niece, Meryl Silverberg, who has been captured. She was stationed there and then resisted, so she's been also captured. And basically from there, antics ensue.
Now, do we really find the DARPA chief?
Yeah, we're going to get to that. So antics ensue.
Yeah.
Because actually Metal Gear is there. The Metal Gear Rex that can launch nukes that are undetectable by modern nuke detection systems.
See, it is a new Metal Gear.
And actually, the DARPA chief was Foxhound member Decoy Octopus in disguise for some reason.
Yeah, and I thought that you eventually find the corpse of the real DARPA chief later, right?
You do, yeah. In the interrogation sequence, he's in the room, and Snake is like, he's way decomposed, but he died earlier today.
I just remember that a friend of mine at the time, because I was in high school when this came out. Anytime that somebody was telling a story that was rambling on, he would just interject with, and the DARPA chief was there. And I don't know why it was always funny, but it was always funny.
So, and this is where we haven't even gotten through all the actualies yet. We're only 2 actualies in. But the basic premise is Snake is looking to disarm nuclear weapons, and then this is all of the weird shit that gets twisted onto it. he finds this DARPA chief. Turns out later on in the game, we learn that that DARPA chief was actually one of the Foxhound members, Decoy Octopus, and he died from a thing that we're going to talk about in a minute. But it has no bearing whatsoever on the story.
No.
It doesn't matter at all. We never actually see Decoy Octopus.
Nope. In the manual, you see him.
For no fucking reason. They're just like, yeah, one of those boss fights you were expecting, he died earlier in the game. And you're like, okay, why? And they're like, we don't know. We don't actually know. Because he still gave you useful fucking information.
That's true, yeah.
So I'm like, why was he helping you?
Was he lying at the time? I don't remember. Doesn't matter.
There's so much talking. There's so much talking.
There is, yeah.
Especially
for a game of this era.
Holy shit. And a lot of it is just random, did you know that bears in Alaska will eat their own shit when they're starving? And you're like, I just want to save my game. Why? I need to go to school. I have shit going on. What is happening?
Yeah.
And actually, there's a virus running rampant on the island that was set loose by Naomi Hunter, who is actually a double agent. And actually, that virus is also infecting Snake, and Naomi was targeting him.
Oh, no.
And actually, the government knew about Metal Gear Rex and was using all of this data to perfect the weapons platform employed on Metal Gear Rex. And actually, the United States president was in on it, and Revolver Ocelot was a double agent who was sent there to get the specs for Metal Gear Rex for the president.
Oh, you skipped one.
What did I skip?
You missed that Master Miller was actually Liquid Snake all along.
Actually Liquid Snake. Oh. It's whenever so my kid, whenever she learns a new word, she just kind of use it just to feel it out.
Yeah. That's how kids do.
And I feel like this whole game is like Hideo Kojima just learned what a twist is and was like, I'm just going to use over and over repeatedly.
He just saw the Sixth Sense.
The story, realistically, is fucking bonkers.
Oh, yeah.
It's bonkers in a fun, dumb, just over-the-top kind of way.
Now these days, in 2023, we know Kojima games are going to be bonkers. That's a given. But at the time when this came out, that wasn't as well known. Nobody knew who
especially
Hideo
because
Kojima was.
The previous two games were kind of straight-laced.
Yeah, comparatively. Not completely straight laced.
No,
looking at the MSX games,
but much more than MGS was. MGS was really a tonal turn.
Yeah, but it was still down to earth enough that a lot of PS1 players were like, "Oh, this is a deep espionage story."
Yes.
So it was. It didn't get as off the rails as MGS2, which then in turn didn't get as off the rails as later games.
As far as presentation, you wrote that it looks great for a PS1 game, and I had to sit and think about it, and I think I agree. It's not pre-rendered.
No, it's all polygonal.
It's rendering as the game goes. Yeah. So everything, at least playing in full HD with widescreen hacks on, which is how I played, everything's wiggly.
I bet.
It looks like a fucking Dr. Katz cartoon. Everyone's just wiggling around all the time.
So, in fairness, when you play it on a 25-inch CRT monitor in 1998,
it's a lot less noticeable.
Yeah, it looks pretty great, to be honest.
Yeah.
And even the PC port that Microsoft put out, looks fine. Like it obviously looks like a 25-year-old game, but it looks fine.
The soundtrack is fantastic.
Oh yeah,
very good soundtrack, very atmospheric. I think the little opening song, the little doot doot song, I feel like that's the best song in the game.
The one on the logo screen, or that's just stolen from Police Knots.
Oh, well, there you go. It's great.
Yeah, Police Knots had a great soundtrack. The end.
And it has voice acting, and for the era, it's great voice acting.
Oh, yeah.
For the now era, it's a little embarrassing voice acting, but it fits the tone of the game.
True. And I do, again, think that the GameCube remake takes this voice cast and does a much better job.
Yes. Yes, most definitely.
Yeah.
Let's talk gameplay.
Yeah. It's stealth espionage action.
It's
Justin.
stealth espionage action. That
Says it
old
right on the box.
That old genre. A lot of the game is you sneaking up on opponents and snapping necks. That's
true.
That's a lot of it.
Unless you're really bad at it.
Yeah, which I was, because
too.
I forgot I can snap their necks till halfway through the game, and I was like, oh yeah, I fucking do that. I don't just have to run by them all. And this game introduces the Soliton radar, which is the thing that Metal Gear Solid keeps moving forward.
And really all stealth games after this just adopted.
Yeah. And the Soliton radar is I think realistically a product of necessity. Because the whole game is these weird, mostly downward camera angles.
Yep.
And it makes it so that in a stealth game where you are stealthing around, you can almost never see a whole room at once.
No.
So you spend a lot of the game playing by the Soliton radar.
You know, I feel like a lot of this was leftover game design from those MSX games. Like this is a team of people that were still not 100% comfortable with these 3D polygonal environments. They were used to these 2D environments. And so a lot of the gameplay principles are based around this 2D environment, but the game isn't 2D. So they had to find some compromise.
Like if you took the Soliton radar and replaced the dots and the lines with 2D sprite work, it would just be a 2D Metal Gear game. The 2D Metal Gear game still exists inside of Metal Gear Solid as the Soliton radar.
Yeah. Which is honestly why I had such a struggle playing the later games after this one, because starting with Metal Gear Solid 2, that's not as much the case. And the games are built around that, 3D environment a little bit better. And so I struggled a lot. I could not hide at all. I could not figure it out. And then MGS3 takes away the fucking radar and just expects you to hide in the grass. And I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. And I just die a lot.
So it's both a very cool design choice. It's a very interesting design idea of, hey, we're comfortable in this 2D design space. How do we make it 3D? Well, you don't. You just keep it 2D and make it cinematic.
Yeah.
But also, it's kind of annoying that I spend so much of the time looking at this little postage stamp, because that's how I'm actually sneaking around and playing the game.
That's fair.
There is a first-person mode. Anytime you're pushed up against walls, it does zoom in to kind of a more forward camera angle, but it's all kind of vestigial. You're really playing the game top-down and by Soliton radar. That's how the game is really played.
Yeah.
It uses...
Which for me, I look at the mini-map in every single game almost all the time, so it doesn't feel that different for me.
Yeah. I love the inventory system in this game. This was another innovation that they did, and I would say really one of the bigger innovations, because again, the Soliton radar is basically them saying, hey, we're still making the same 2D game. The inventory system was revamped.
Yeah. And actually taking advantage of the PS1 controller.
Yeah, which uses the 4 shoulder buttons, and it makes the GameCube version of the game a little weirder to play because there's not 4 shoulder buttons. Yeah. And the inventory system, once you get used to it and the order things are in, it's fast. It's fast to equip and unequip things.
Yep.
It also describes what all your stuff is while you're in it, and it keeps you in the action. It doesn't switch you to a different screen, which sounds kind of silly, but even games now, whenever you hit the menu, it takes you to a totally different screen.
Yeah, it often pauses the action, and there is an advantage of pausing it like that, but
it's a tactical advantage. You can look at what's around you. You can carefully select your item based on the information you can still see on the screen.
Yep,
and it's great. I love the inventory system in MGS games. It's so fun. It's so fast. It's cool. It's very satisfying sound wise. We didn't even talk about like the UI, sound design, the sound effects. They're really good.
Yeah,
the little boops whenever I'm flipping through my inventory.
Also, as annoying as it was when I was playing the game, I love the codec sound when you're getting a call.
Yeah, for sure. It's very good sound effects in this game. Let's fire through the bosses before we talk about some other stuff. There's not a lot of them.
True.
Just a few, and one of them kills himself, so that just works out great. First up, you have Revolver Ocelot, which is a pretty straightforward boss battle, and the game's not quite gotten weird yet, right? Yeah. And you run into this man that's weirdly obsessed with this cowboy gun, but it's just kind of a straight gun battle, and you're like, okay, well, that was kind of strange, but, we just shot at each other, and then, whatever.
I love the image that floats around on the internet where it's Revolver Ocelot introducing himself, and so it's got the subtitle at the bottom of the screen that says Revolver Ocelot, but it also has the on-screen infographic that says this is Revolver Ocelot, and has the voice actor in parenthesis, but somebody replaced it with Revolver Ocelot, so it just says Revolver Ocelot a bunch of times, and sometimes they put that inside of a frame that is listed at the bottom as Revolver Ocelot. I love that. It's such a great picture.
So that first fight, you're like, all right, that dude was kind of weirdly into this single action army revolver, but just a gunfight. Kind of strange tonally, but okay.
Yeah.
And then you fight the cyborg ninja.
Uh-huh.
Who is a fucking cyborg ninja.
He is a cyborg ninja, yes.
Who you learn is a resuscitated corpse of someone you used to know.
Look, sometimes these things happen.
And you're like,
sometimes Gray Fox just needs to come back.
And you're like, all right, now it's really fucking weird. And then you meet a scientist who immediately explains to you a term that he calls Japanimation.
Okay, in fairness, everyone in America called it that at the time.
Well, he also called it anime right fucking before that.
Just like he knew one of my Japanese animes.
And then he pisses himself and explains Japanimation to a man who just fought a cyborg ninja and a cowboy. And you're starting to think, this is getting fucking weird, dude. This is some weird fucking shit.
Yeah.
And then you move forward to fight Sniper Wolf. You start to team up with Meryl, who's kind of a weird character in the game. She seems to exist just so that Solid Snake can sit around and deliver soliloquies about how war is actually terrible.
And also so he can make comments about her butt.
Yeah. Weird kind of skeevy comments.
Yeah.
But
one thing I really like about the Sniper Wolf fight is afterwards you get her bandana, and anytime you equip the bandana, the wolves won't attack you anymore. And that's such a neat little useless thing.
There's little things like that. Or like Snake shoved or no, he didn't shove them. He swallowed his cigarettes and then dug them out of his own shit.
Yeah.
Or vomit. Yeah. And then you use them to identify laser beams. Tripwires. There's the Psycho Mantis fight, which is legendary.
Oh, yeah. Well
in the video game space, because Psycho Mantis can read your mind. So you have to use controller port 2, and he can read your memory card and talk about some of the games you played before. It's very fourth wall breaking. It's very cool.
Loved it.
And very...
And there's pictures of Kojima and somebody else behind him, and I don't remember who the somebody else is anymore.
The whole thing's very fourth wall breaking and gets weird and supernatural and bonkers.
Yes.
And then it just degrades from there. From here, it's twist after twist. You fight Sniper Wolf. She shoots Meryl. You think Meryl's dead. And Psycho Mantis also takes over Meryl's mind. She seems to be the
damsel in distress, essentially. Yeah.
I think she really exists just because Snake has to have a weak spot.
Yeah.
And they don't want to give Snake an actual weak point. They go, no. We have to deliver one to him in the form of someone he's trying to protect.
Yeah.
Sniper Wolf is also a cool fight. I mean, it's a sniper battle, like a legitimate sniper battle on PlayStation 1.
Yeah. Yeah. And it as far as a sniper battle in 1999, whenever I played it, it was the most impressive sniper battle I'd ever played in a game.
For sure. One of the better ones. Yeah. You fight Vulcan Raven, who's just a big man with a bunch of crows and a machine gun.
Yeah.
And then it goes right into the end of the game. You hit, after this, you hit disc 2.
Yep.
And you're thinking, all right, I'm about halfway into this game. I'm on the second disc out of 2. No, my friend. You have to account for the Hideo Kojima produced movie that you're going to be watching later. And disc 2 is where the game kind of falls apart for me a little bit. So far, there's a little bit of tedium, but it's pretty fun. It's moving at a pretty decent clip. Yeah. It's weird. Once I get used to how to use the Soliton radar and get used to my inventory and stuff, I'm playing it just fine. It's a pretty difficult game.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of just sort of weirdness, like as you're figuring out how Nikita missiles work and stuff like
Right.
you have to unequip your gas mask in the gas area to equip the key card to go through the door to then put your gas mask back on. Just kind of weird tedium like that kind of could have been better designed. And then you hit the second disc and you find Metal Gear Rex in this hangar.
Uh-huh.
And you spend the next few hours just kind of running back and forth in this hangar. Taking keys. You have this key and it's like, oh, your key is actually 3 keys because it reacts to heat and you have to go get it cold and then go get it hot and then run back to this control room and then run back and forth on Metal Gear Rex. And it's just, there's not a lot of gameplay on the second disc.
There is, but it's a lot of tedious gameplay.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of repetitive, tedious gameplay in the exact same area where you're just going back and forth. But then you eventually do run into Liquid Snake. Turns out Master Miller has been Liquid Snake all along. Why didn't he sabotage you long before now? I don't fucking know. The same reason Decoy Octopus as the DARPA chief gave you legitimately useful information. I have no fucking idea. It makes no sense.
Really, he should have shown up to stop you before you got Nikita missiles. That probably would have helped.
Or, before you fucking did like any of the shit that you did. So you fight Liquid Snake in Metal Gear Rex. Gray Fox shows up. It's a whole dramatic moment. Gray Fox sacrifices himself, and you eventually destroy Metal Gear Rex in what is a pretty cool boss fight.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. The only strategy I could figure out was just to brute force it and try to do more damage faster than it could do damage to me. That was how I did it. Because you can't really hide. You go hide behind these boxes, and he's got these heat-seeking missiles that still find you.
Yeah.
And then it gets weird. You're like, all right, I've blown up Metal Gear Rex. I'm trying to save Meryl. I could see her in my head every time I say Meryl, it's David Hayter going, Meryl, 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 which he says repeatedly.
There was a video on the internet, real early on the internet, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where somebody took a handful of clips from this game where it's Snake talking to Meryl, only they replaced Meryl's voice with the Pokemon Meryl. So it's like Snake like, Meryl, and then she's like, Meryl. And it's great. I love that video.
So then it descends into even more weirdness. At this point, we've learned about the Fox Die virus that has been given to a bunch of them. We've learned about genetic twins. We've learned about double and triple crosses. We've learned about the U.S. Secretary of Defense is staging this like internal coup. It's just this whole fucking thing.
Very Kojima-y.
You've defeated Metal Gear Rex, and you're like, all right, save Meryl, get the fuck off the island before it gets nuked by the government because they're going to nuke us because they don't want the virus to get off the island.
Right.
And then...
Which maybe they shouldn't have brought the virus in the first place, but
Maybe. Then you have a shirtless fist fight with Liquid Snake on top of Metal Gear Rex.
Right. Yeah, that's where you
That is, 1, extremely hard.
Yeah.
2, extremely stupid. And 3, pretty damn not fun. But it's really more annoying.
They don't even rip off their shirts Yakuza style first.
No, they're just already shirtless when they show up.
Shirtless.
You're like, what? Well, I guess Snake's not shirtless. Is he? No, he's shirtless. They're both shirtless.
Yeah.
And granted, shirtless fist fights at the end of a Metal Gear game become a thing.
Right.
It's a thing in Metal Gear. There are multiple shirtless fist fights at the end of Metal Gear games. One of them on top of a nuclear missile that is firing. It is being fired. It is in the air. But all this to say, it's kind of an annoying boss fight. And you're like, all right, I've defeated Liquid Snake. I punched him to death. Yeah. Now we can escape. You and Meryl go and you get in a Jeep and you go to escape. Yeah. You drive off, and then who shows up driving behind you? Saturn. It's Liquid Snake in a Jeep with a FAMAS.
Oh, right.
Fucking shooting you.
I forgot about that.
And so you have this whole Jeep chase scene. You fly out, you crash your Jeeps, and then your next foe is Liquid Snake's battered body as he comes crawling out of the wreckage and then kills over from a heart attack due to the Fox Die virus.
Yeah. Well, most of him does.
Most of him. Because later on, obviously, you fight Liquid Snake's arm in a subsequent game.
Right. Yeah. Grafted onto Revolver Ocelot.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, Saturn.
Totally normal. Totally.
And then, of course, the whole thing is they're like, yeah, Snake's got the Foxeye virus in him. Well, when is it going to activate? He asks Naomi, he's like, well, when is it going to activate? How much time do I have? And she's like, as much time as you have. And he's like, no, when am I going to fucking die? And she's like, whenever it happens. And they go back and forth like this a few times. And finally, he's like, all right, he just accepts it.
Yeah.
And then he gets on a fucking snowmobile and drives away on a snowmobile from an island?
Yeah, that's what you do in Alaska.
Eventually he hits the ocean, right? I mean, what does he do?
There's a land bridge. It's fine.
The fucking Bering Strait unearthed itself for Solid Snake to...
The ocean froze over. It's fine. He just sailed across.
And so that's mostly Metal Gear Solid.
So,
now,
yeah, it's based on a true story.
Complaints I have. The end of the game is just pretty tedious.
True, yeah.
It really, it felt like, what it feels like is Kojima trying to justify the second disc. I think he just couldn't fit all of his cutscenes of caribou eating grass into one disc. And so he's like, all right, I need to add some cutscenes. So maybe the key is 3 keys. We'll add in some weird runaround chase shit. And then you can watch my movie.
Yeah, I really hate the key part. That's the one part of the game that I really want to throw away.
And then... The shirtless fist fight thing was just, it should have been like a mini game or something, and I think it is in like Metal Gear Solid 4. And also the goddamn fucking stupid torture scene.
I've never had a complaint with the torture scene. I know a lot of people hate it, but I've never had an issue with it.
I can't press the fucking circle button fast enough, Saturn.
Oh, I have weird turbo fingers.
Yeah, I don't have turbo fingers, and it's annoying, and it just goes on for forever, and it's just repetitive.
We were some of us were talking in the Discord one day about turbo fingers, and several of us were talking about how we all just arbitrarily have the exact same strategy that we've had since childhood.
Is it 2 fingers, and you put it on the button, you kind of vibrate your arm?
Yes, yeah. You pinch your thumb and your pointer finger, and you just put them both on the button, and you just vibrate your hand. And that seems just fine for me for this scene.
I just turned on turbo on my controller, but it still took me 20 minutes to tune it because the game was weirdly sensitive to how much turbo it was using because it's trying to detect turbo and to block it because fuck you, Kojima.
Yes, you have to not use a turbo controller. You can't do that.
No, you can use a turbo controller that fires at 10 presses per second. That's what I figured out.
You have to not use a turbo controller that was made for the PlayStation 1.
Right.
Yes.
For me, the end kind of kills how great the first disc is great. That's a great game. The second disc, it's okay.
But that's where all the story is, Justin.
Oh, Saturn, I know. I know. But it almost feels like even the story runs out of content because he starts showing you like actual footage.
Oh, yeah.
Of like scientists, and it's just pontificating about just like, well, life is alive and we live, and you're like, man, you ran out of story a disc ago. and I think that's what annoys me about the second disc is that he ran out of gameplay, and he kind of clearly ran out of story.
I have a similar complaint about MGS2, honestly, because I feel like there's this big gap in the middle of MGS2 where like nothing happens, or where the things that do happen are completely unnecessary and just tedious and just time fillers. And then you get to the weird shit at the end, which makes getting through that middle section worthwhile.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, MGS1 kind of shifts all that to the back.
Yeah.
And the end is exciting. There is a lot of shit that happens all of a sudden.
Yeah. I mean, it's fist fights and giant robot battles and shit. Like, don't get me wrong. There's excitement there.
Yeah. It's just it's in the middle of some of the more tedious parts of the gameplay.
I'll say this. I played Metal Gear Solid 4 end to end. Fucking loved it.
Yeah.
And as much as I like to laugh about it's a 90-minute movie after you finish the game, blah, 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 I was invested in that game. I enjoyed it through and through, and it never really felt, there was only a couple of moments I could even think about that really felt like, what are we doing here? It was pretty high note, end to end, weird as fuck high note, but it was there. And this one just feels like they couldn't quite get the pacing right.
Yeah.
The good parts of the game, again, the first disc, is just fucking great. I have some minor complaints, but that's it.
I think it's just that early installment weirdness where they hadn't quite figured everything out yet. And I do feel like the GameCube version, while often it doesn't get as much credit as the original, I feel like it does fix a lot of these issues that I have with the original.
Yes. I did want to mention equipment. Nikita missiles are vital to playing this game for me. I use Nikita missiles on everything and everyone.
Yes.
There is...
Also, chafe grenades are surprisingly useful in MGS1.
It kind of demands that you use them constantly to an almost annoying, like a comedic degree where you're running upstairs. Because a lot of times if it's just like one or two little gun turrets, you'll just ignore them and you just, I got hit a couple times, whatever. But I was running upstairs in one section. I think it's after the Hind D fight with Liquid Snake. Because I forgot, you kill him in a fucking helicopter halfway through the game. You kill Liquid Snake 15 times.
Yeah.
And
he's liquid. He survives. He just
you're running up these stairs
up and gets better.
You're running up these stairs and you're like, oh, there's 2 cameras. That's fine. Oh, man, 3 cameras. That's fine. Then you go up the next flight and there's like 9 cameras on the wall. And you're like, fuck you, Kojima. I don't want to use a chaff grenade.
You're going to use chaff grenades, man.
There is no silenced trank gun in the first Metal Gear, which I know everyone that played it is like, well, yeah, duh, there wasn't. That wasn't until the next one. But I feel like the silenced trank gun is very much a very notable staple in the Metal Gear Solid franchise. The cardboard boxes are there, but seem very ineffective.
On easy mode, or very easy mode, they're okay.
I feel like they were pumped up a little bit in later games.
Yeah. Well, I think in MGS1 they're more for almost comedic purposes.
It feels that way. Yeah.
Relief.
Every time I used them, someone would go, "Oh, look, a box," and go over there and open it. And I'm like, "Well, how do I use it so that they don't come open the fucking box?"
Whereas in later games, it almost took them seriously, like it was part of the lore or something.
Yeah. Well, what gets me is like, if it's just there for comedic effect, why are there 3 of them? Well, that seems excessive.
Well, what if box C is more important than box B, Justin?
None of them are important. They don't protect me.
I feel like there was something about one of the 3 boxes was labeled differently, or maybe they were all labeled differently, and so if you use certain ones in certain areas that people wouldn't notice them or something. I don't remember.
Sure
it's been a really long time. I don't remember if that was MGS1 or a different one, but I remember that being a strategy somebody told me, and I don't know if they were bullshitting me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
As far as reception, this was universally praised.
Yes.
By literally everyone.
Yeah. Critics, fans, everybody just absolutely loved the game.
Yeah. Sales were high. 6.78 million units were sold worldwide by 2004.
Yes.
It won.
Though it's hard to say that because when I was looking up the numbers, Sony and Konami both give oddly conflicting data about how many copies the game sold. They say that it had sold already 6 million units by like 2000, but then a year later they're like the total combined units in all the regions is 4.5 million, and then a couple years after that they're like, oh, it sold 6.78 million, with 6.78 million of those being in one region. And it's just very strange. It's a very strange number, so I don't know definitively if that's the right number.
Yeah. And it has won awards just kind of nonstop.
Oh, yeah. Since release till now.
Yeah, just constantly. As far as legacy, you got Integral and VR Missions pretty off the bat. VR Missions is kind
of just VR Missions.
It's just literally, hey, what if there's no story and it was just the game?
A shitload of VR missions.
And I knew a lot of people that liked VR Missions, and they're like, yeah, that's fun, but it just didn't ever seem very super celebrated.
No.
Integral, I don't quite know what all it adds or not.
So far as I know, which I'm going off of memory, I probably should have written this down. I believe it is the base game plus VR Missions plus any of the changes that were made to the Western version of the game added to the Japanese version of the game.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
There was Ghost Babel, the Game Boy Color game, which I have, and it's cool.
Yeah. Internationally, it was just called Metal Gear Solid. It's not.
It's no, not at all.
Babel. Yeah.
We got the Twin Snakes remake on GameCube, which is I started with PS1 Metal Gear Solid, and it was a hard transition for me. Because I'm used to later Metal Gears.
Yeah.
And then I went to Twin Snakes, and I'm like, oh, this is just like Metal Gear Solid 2 jammed into Metal Gear Solid 1.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And then I ended up going back to MGS1 on PS1, and my intent was to play both games for this episode. I did not end up doing that.
That's a bit of a time investment.
But Twin Snakes is definitely real different.
Yeah, they changed quite a bit.
It's the same basic beats.
Yeah.
But
it's built in the MGS2 engine, I believe.
Yeah, it feels like the MGS2 engine. It looks like it. It moves like it.
Yeah.
It's also really good.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But different enough that it does not deprecate the original game.
Yeah. Did you try the PC port at all?
I started fussing with it on my deck and then just gave up because I was like, well, I have a PS1 emulator, so I'm not gonna fuss with it.
Yeah, I don't know how well it would work on a deck or not, but GOG did fix it up so that it works fine on modern versions of Windows, which is pretty impressive. And it's a solid port.
There have been many sequels. We got Metal Gear Solids 2 through 5.
Metal Gear Solid 3D on 3DS. That was the most important one.
We got Rising Revengeance.
Yeah, Rising Revengeance.
All those Metal Gear games. We got all of the PSP Metal Gear Solid games.
True, like 40 of them on there.
Although I guess really they're just Metal Gear games. It's Acid and Peace Walker and everything else. But they're effectively, it's Metal Gear Solid. It's the same franchise. They seem to be
part of the Solid universe more than the original Metal Gear.
And then you get imitators like, I don't know, that Splinter Cell would exist without Metal Gear.
I can't imagine Splinter Cell existing without Metal Gear first.
And there have been others. Metal Gear was very much like, this is the stealth espionage action genre. We are inventing it.
Right. In the same way that Resident Evil invented the survival horror genre, which it didn't really, but it did.
Right.
Metal Gear Solid similarly invented the stealth game genre. And you saw just several imitators real quickly, and then not too many of them really had the staying power that Metal Gear did. Splinter Cell kind of did for a while. But
Splinter Cell is still making new games, I believe.
Are they?
I'm gonna look this up. I don't want to know.
I didn't think they had made one in many years, but I did hear that Splinter Cell Man made a cameo in Mr. Splinter Cell. Sorry, Mr. Splinter Cell.
Yeah, Sam Fisher is his name, by the way.
And he
Splinter Cell Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Blacklist Aftermath came out in 2013, and they had Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Firewall in 2022. Oh no, wait, that was the fucking audiobook or whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the last one was 10 years ago. Then
it's 10 years, just a mere decade. I mean, when was the last Metal Gear Solid?
Aftermath is also a novel.
Oh, goddamn. So Endgame? No, that's a novel. 2009, Conviction is the last one.
Yeah.
No, that says it's a tie-in novel. Oh, I'm in the novels section. That's why. Hold on a minute. Please hold. Blacklist 2013.
Okay.
Was the last.
So 10 years ago was the last Splinter Cell, which the last Metal Gear was, 7 or 8 years ago now?
Yeah, I mean, what was it? It was 2015. It was 2015-ish because I remember my daughter was so tiny I had her strapped to me in a papoose, and I was bouncing up and down so that she could take a nap. And with my hands, I was playing Metal Gear Solid 5 on my PlayStation.
But yeah, I had heard that Splinter Cellman showed up in one of the more recent Assassin's Creed games or something.
Well, I mean, it's all Ubisoft, so it makes
or maybe
sense.
It was a Ghost Recon game or something like that. I don't know. One of them Ubi games.
Fisher. Saturn.
Yeah.
Sam Fisher.
Yeah, Mr. Splinter Cell. I'm sorry, Dr. Splinter Cell.
So Metal Gear Solid has quite the legacy that is kind of up in the air right now.
Yeah. There's been constant rumors that Konami is announcing a remake or a re-release or remaster or something any day now. And who knows? At this point, they could suddenly announce 12 games, or they could announce nothing for 8 years. We don't know.
Yeah, or they could just go invest in more real estate. It's hard to say. I think that I could see them doing remakes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that they could make a Metal Gear 6 or that they would make a Metal Gear 6 without Kojima.
Yeah, my personal assumption, and this is just a guess, is before Kojima left, he and his team mentioned that what they were more interested in than making another sequel was remaking the MSX games in a more modern format. And I could see Konami outsourcing that to another studio to remake those MSX games or even the first MGS. I could see that happening well before I ever see a sequel.
Yeah. Most definitely.
If there is a sequel, I bet it's a complete series reboot.
And honestly, really honestly, and I said this at the time, Metal Gear Solid 4 feels like the last Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid 5 is an awesome game, and I love it, but it feels like a different franchise. It feels like, hey, we finished Solid Snake's story in the last game, and boy, did they. And this is the new... This is the new
Kiefer Sutherland game.
Right. Metal Gear Kiefer Sutherland. So in a way, we did get to see Snake's, Solid Snake's story all the way through from before the beginning to the very end of the end.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have that kind of encapsulation of a story. This closure. Yes. It's the whole thing. And we got it. Yeah. And it got to, with Metal Gear Solid 4, go out on its highest note.
Yeah.
That game was just self-indulgence, the game.
I wonder if they'll ever re-release 4.
God, I want 4 to be re-released so bad. It's so good. Anyone that didn't play MGS4, man, it's real good.
It's just, it's so difficult to port from PS3 to things.
Yeah. So I wonder how well it emulates.
Pretty well from what I've heard.
Interesting. Well, I have a Steam Deck, so maybe I will explore it. Anyway,
that's the Metal Gears.
That's the Metal Gears, and Metal Gear Solid, still a good game. It feels a little dated, but not as dated as a lot of extremely lauded games from 1997.
I remember hearing
1998.
I remember hearing a guy at a Blockbuster asking the guy at the counter if they had that Solid Metal Gear.
Yeah, the solid one, not the liquid one.
Yeah, you don't want those shitty Metal Gears. You want them to be good and solid.
Yeah. Well, Saturn, you know what else is solid? It's our Patreon at patreon.com/Retro Warriors. It is not liquid at all. No liquid at all.
Only its arm is liquid.
Only its arm is liquid, and we're going to graft it onto Andrew after his is cut off by a ninja. And you can hear about it.
Revolver Andrew.
Revolver Andrew. We would love to have your support there. We would love it if you rated and reviewed the show. We would love it if you're on the socials, if you go like or thumbs up or whatever our stuff.
Yeah.
And it would mean a lot to us if you would consider supporting us. We've done this 400 times. Maybe you give us a couple bucks. That'd be awesome for doing that. And of course, we want to thank the following patrons for their kind donations on episode 400, of course.
Indeed.
Starting with Retronauts does adventure game episodes. Well, guess fucking what? We are not Retronauts.
Perfect for this episode. Also, Michael Castro.
Millie's homemade ice cream is the best ever.
Retro Video Game Zone Jason.
Burger Champ.
Dr. Jason Tharp.
Justin's transitions are my new favorite part of the show.
Harry Pry.
Mr. Jiggyfly.
And Todd Bass.
Are all the patrons we want to thank for their kind donations. We want to thank you for listening.
Absolutely.
Potentially for 400. There are people out there, people in the world that exist, that are alive right now, hopefully, that have listened to over 400 episodes of us talking about video games.
Let me tell you something. I haven't listened to 400 hours of either one of us talking in my life.
I don't think you've listened to a single episode of the show.
I haven't even listened to us while we're recording.
So anyone that's out there that's been with us for this 400 episodes, because I know that I people are like, oh yeah, I got caught up. People, because we always talk about, like, people will listen to whatever episodes interest them.
Yeah.
But then there are some people in the Discord, they're like, oh yeah, I got caught up, which implies that they've listened to everything so far.
Man.
Which kudos, because man, that's got to be at least over 600 hours of audio. That's insanity.
And maybe 100 of them are worthwhile.
That's like half of a Trails game. I mean, who has the time?
You could finish part of the Yakuza series in that.
Anyway, thank you so much for your support and for listening for 400 episodes. Hopefully we do it for 400 more episodes.
Right.
I want to make it to 1,000. I think that's where I want to make it.
Great.
And then I'd be like, yeah, that's enough.
We would be nearly 20 years at that point.
Man. Well, then,
Your kid would be in college if we get to episode 1,000.
Holy shit. That sounds awesome. I hope that happens. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. And as always, let us cling together.